Okay, today we're going to talk about Module 11, which gets us into teaching a lesson. So today in next class period we're going to talk about some of the components and putting together a teaching lesson that you're actually going to give to us. So the assignment for this particular module is you're going to develop and prepare a teaching lesson that you're going to give to us in case to the rest of us. My online students are going to record themselves giving it. You guys are actually going to teach it to us. So you're going to pick your content area, what you're planning to teach. You'll pick a grade level. You'll pick a specific subject, and you're going to teach it. You really only have about 5 to 7 minutes to teach this lesson. So, it's not a long time, but you can teach some good content in 5 minutes. Okay, and I'm going to go through and there's a lot of components to this, all right? This assignment is going to be worth a lot of points, and we're going to go through and kind of show you the different parts in terms of preparing this lesson. But as part of one of the very first parts, the most important parts of getting a lesson ready to go is that preparation. Okay, taking the time to prepare your lesson. Teaching is not a profession where you just wing it. And we've all had professors or teachers who have winged it. And yes, when you're experienced and you have some things to fall back on, you might be able to get away with it every once in a while, but it's certainly not the best way to teach. And for you guys, as probably not having taught a lot, not having done a lot of lessons, you definitely should not wing this thing because it will not go well. All right, and your score will certainly reflect it. So part of getting ready to go is putting together a lesson plan. How many of you have made a lesson plan before? Okay, so a handful of you have done a lesson plan. So good, you have a little experience with this. And so we're going to go through and kind of look at all of the different steps and things in terms of putting together a good lesson plan. Now, I've given you some handouts here. These will be posted on the LIT site as well as in Blackboard. So I'll show you here at the end where these are in Blackboard, but you'll be able to reference back to those. But this is for you to kind of follow along and see. So one of the first things we'll start with here is I've given you a lesson plan template. All right, this is my template that I like to use. You might go to another teacher ed class and they might have a different template that they like to use. I did pull this from a lot of the information from teacher ed, so hopefully there is some consistency, but you might see it a little bit different. And there's this is the one and only right way to make a lesson plan. All right, everybody kind of has their own preference and own way to do it. So but this is what I'd like you to use for this class. So as part of this lesson plan, you have a subject area. This might be you are teaching math. Okay, you're going to identify that. You're going to identify the grade level and the date. Next, we have the time needed for this lesson. For the assignment that I'm giving you 45 minutes. I want you to prepare a 45-minute lesson. Now, what you actually are going to record, for online students recording, but what you are actually going to teach to us, I'm only giving you like 5 minutes. Okay, your lesson plan is going to cover a whole 45 minutes. And I'll explain this more as we move along, but just keep in mind. So you're going to need to design a lesson that's going to take about 45 minutes. When you think about teaching something, do you want a 45-minute PowerPoint? No. Do you enjoy sitting through a 45-minute PowerPoint? No, and neither do your students. So you might have a 15-minute PowerPoint. And then what are the other things that you're going to do as part of this lesson to help teach your students these things? And that's things you're going to list as part of this lesson plan. Just as an example here, this I have on on Blackboard as well, is kind of just an example of a lesson plan that I've used actually for this class. And so you can kind of see what I'm looking for as we go through here. So the first thing you're going to put is the objective of the lesson. Now let me preface it with, a lot of times you'll see objective and outcome used interchangeably. And they use it some ways in the same way. I believe they are different, and that's why I want to teach you, and I want you to learn that they are different. So they are not the same, and this is how they're different. So the objective is the general goal of the lesson. So think about it as prior to you teaching the class, this is your goal for this lesson. All right, so today we're going to learn about the U.S. Constitution. Okay, that's my general goal. So that students, maybe the goal would write something like that students would learn about the students would understand the U.S. Constitution. And that's what I'd put in the objective. So you have one objective for the class. The next section, and more importantly, are the student learning outcomes. Okay, those are the outcomes. So those are the things that students should be able to know or be able to do at the end of your lesson. Outcomes are measurable, meaning that we can collect information from students and measure whether or not they learned that outcome. Okay, so the goal is before the class, the objective is before the class. The outcome is at the end of the class. This is what students will be able to know or do after going through this lesson. Does that make sense? Okay, so your objective, you should have one objective. Your outcomes, I'm going to recommend that you have approximately 3 to 5. And that's just my own personal rule that I'm going to use right now, and every lesson is going to be a little bit different. Okay, 1 is not enough. 20 is way too many. All right, so 3 to 5 is kind of a good balance. And in general, for this lesson that you're going to teach us, that's what I'd like you to use. Every lesson is going to be a little bit different. So outcomes are more important. And outcomes, there are specific ways that we write outcomes. Okay, remember, outcomes are things that students will be able to know or do at the end of the lesson, and they are measurable. So in order to meet those requirements, we have some different examples that we can use. So I've given you a handout that has the ABCD model for writing. In this case, it probably says objectives on that handout, doesn't it? No. Okay, good. All right. So I've seen places that call it objective as well, and so I just want to make sure you might see it used interchangeably. Isn't this what I've given you? Yes. All right, so objectives, right?
Ours says outcome.
It does?
Yep.
Good, that's what I wanted to say. Mine doesn't say that up here. All right, I must have manually changed it before I gave it to you. All right, so the ABCD model is kind of a recognizable model for writing outcomes. And there are 4 parts to it. There's the audience, the behavior, the condition, and the degree. Each outcome should have these 4 components. Now, I'm a stickler on the first 2 components. Okay, 3 and 4, I'm a little bit flexible on. Okay, so let's look at a couple of things you can see here. They have 4 distinct components. Okay, they must be observable and measurable. The use of words like understand and learn or to know are generally not acceptable. So an outcome that says students will understand the U.S. Constitution, what's wrong with that?
You're not supposed to use the word understand.
You're not supposed to use it. Why not? Okay, how do you measure understand? Or students will know about the U.S. Constitution. Well, how do you measure that? Okay, so that's where you don't use understand or know or learn in an outcome. Now, if you put that as your general objective, that's okay. I'm okay with that because we're not measuring the objective. What we are measuring is outcomes. So that's a very common mistake, to write an outcome that says students will understand this concept. No, because it's hard to measure. So these 4 components help us to write good objectives. So first of all, we're going to identify the audience. Who is going to be the person learning this outcome? And that's going to be who?
Students.
Good. Okay, so the intended learners at the end of the instruction, so these are students. So you can see in my example, the TECS 301 students will be able to. All right, so I'm going to identify what students will be able to know or do at the end of this lesson. Okay, so whether you put this at the beginning of every one or you just have a generic one and then they follow, either way is okay. Does that make sense? Okay, but first you got to identify the audience. Next, we identify the behavior. Okay, the behavior. And when we talk about behavior, this is where we're identifying specifically what students will be able to know and do. So you can see here where students will be able to define, students will be able to create, they'll be able to recognize, utilize, share, and post. Those are all things that are identifying what students will know and be able to do, and those are all measurable. So as part of this, when we are writing these, we want to use Bloom's taxonomy verbs. How many of you have heard of Bloom's taxonomy? Okay, it's a nice education thing that you're going to learn about. You take Ed Psych, you'll probably learn even more about it. So I'm just going to very quickly kind of give you a reference point here. So here's a graphic that kind of shows a little bit about Bloom's taxonomy. And what's the idea behind Bloom's taxonomy? We kind of summarize it.
Pretty much gives you different wording, like words to use instead of like understand or.
Okay. All right. So it gives you different words to use, which is the application of it. Why is it important?
Each
Each one builds on each other.
Okay, each builds on each other. Good. So what we're trying to do with Bloom's taxonomy, or kind of the original intention with Bloom's taxonomy, is to identify that there are different levels of learning. And the encouragement is that as we as teachers are teaching concepts, we want to not just use the lower level learning, we want to incorporate middle and upper level learning. So for example, as you see in this graphic on here, that at the bottom is remember or understand. So this involves things like being able to recall facts and basic concepts, explain ideas or concepts. So different Bloom's taxonomy verbs that would go along with these would be, for example, to define or list or memorize or classify or describe. These are things that are really recall information. Okay, are those important? Yes. Are they most important? Okay. So as we move up, okay, we have analyze and apply. This is where students might differentiate. They might relate. They might compare and contrast. They might solve. And then that higher level where students are creating and evaluating. Think about this as, you know, to what degree do students have to use critical thinking or problem solving? So when you are remembering something, do you have to use a lot of critical thinking? You don't. It's just facts, right? You're just remembering it, okay? Recall. Is there a lot of problem solving in terms of understanding or remember? No. It's just recall information. It's just knowing it or not knowing it. Do you use a little more critical thinking or problem solving when you have to apply something or you have to analyze something? And then all the way up to when you actually have to create something, or you have to use critical thinking and problem solving? Yeah. So kind of the idea here is we have different levels of thinking or levels of learning, and as we are teaching things, we want to incorporate all of these. Unfortunately, a lot of education stays where? Okay, at that lower level, right? Think about the test you take, like the test I just gave you. Okay, did that require you to do anything above remember and understand? I mean, not really. Okay, maybe there are a few places where I gave you some scenarios where you had to kind of pick this or those types of things. But you know, when you think about testing, unfortunately, a lot of testing in education is just lower level. It's just that you can remember a fact, right? Not that it's not important, but in the scheme of life and what we want our students to be able to, we don't want our students just to be able to understand and remember things. We want them to be effective in applying, analyzing, creating. When you think about employers hiring people, do they want people that just really are head smart, or do they want people that can actually work and do things? All right, they want to be able to have employees that can solve problems, that can create, think critically and come up with new ideas. So as we are teaching lessons, we want to incorporate all of these. Again, it's not a hard and fast rule. Some lessons are going to be more towards the lower level, but other lessons will incorporate some of these. And as you are designing your lessons, you want to balance. So to bring that back to as we do our lesson plan, that your learning outcomes should have a balance of all of those. And that's something I will be looking for in this, is that you use those different levels as you are writing your learning outcomes. And so I've given you a handout there. Here is a handout beyond Bloom. You can see here we have at the lower levels, remember, understand, middle level, higher level. Okay, and below you have some verbs there that you can use as you are writing your outcomes. Okay, so as you see on my example, the learning outcomes from the lesson that I taught, this goes back to when we did our applications lesson and we learned about PDF files and I had you make a PDF. You remember that? Okay, so my first outcome, define and describe the uses of PDF files. Is that a low, middle, or high level? Low. You just had to define, right? Okay, that was a recall understanding. Create a PDF file. What's that?
Hi.
Okay, that's a higher one. You're actually going and you're doing something. You have to use things, apply things, and create something. Okay, recognize different Adobe Acrobat applications. Recognize? Recognize is really just low, that you can recognize and be able to identify. Utilize hardware and software to record a video reflection. Are you using applications? Are you creating things? Okay, so it's kind of a middle to upper, level where you are applying the information. Share and post a video using a video hosting website. Okay, that'd be middle to upper as well. So as part of your lesson, you want to try to have a balance between those. Yes, ma'am.
What what are those, like, things in the parentheses? Do we need those?
You do. We'll get there.
Okay.
Good. Okay. So this refers back to, if you're following the ABCD model, okay, this, as you're using these Bloom's taxonomy verbs, we have the different behavior. So you're describing the learner capability and what they are going to be doing. Again, using all three of those. The condition is the equipment or tools that may be utilized in completion of the behavior. So, the condition might be using the Adobe Acrobat applications, do this. Okay, so the condition is kind of creating the context, if you will, under which it happens. And then the degree is states the standard for acceptable performance. So how well do you want students to do this? Really, I did not include those in any of these. If you want to write those are okay. And in some contexts, those are important. Other ones, it's not as important. I'm really looking for the most important one I'm looking for is the behavior. What are the Bloom's taxonomy verbs that you're using and how are you using those? And do they clearly identify what students are doing? The condition and degree, they may or may not be in there. Okay, but so for example, maybe the expectation for students is that they pass with 100%. Okay, there might be a certain thing you're teaching in industrial technology. We teach safety. Okay, students have to pass a safety test to 100%. They don't get to go on until they pass it 100%. So the outcome would be 100%. That would be the condition, or excuse me, that would be the degree. Maybe acceptable performance is 80%. So you could add that in, that students would be able to do this to meeting 80%. So that would be different examples of where you might use degree. Again, I'm not a stickler on it in here. Just know that you might get in situations where they expect to see all four of those. So you can see some examples. It's going to take you a little bit of time to write good outcomes. Okay, remember, they're not objectives, they're outcomes. What students will be able to know and do at the end of you teaching your lesson. Now, the little things in parentheses, okay? Your outcomes should be aligned to standards. And on that template that I've given you, this is a lesson plan template, identifies they should be aligned with standards. So, do you have standards for your content area? Are there math standards? Are there science standards? Are there history standards? Are there music standards? Are there art standards? Okay, every subject area has a set of standards. The Common Core is most likely in the state of Kansas. That's what we currently use for a lot of those core areas. So if you're going to be teaching a lesson, likely you might use the Common Core. If you're teaching 4th grade math, you're going to use the Common Core math standards. Or you can, at least. That's an example. How are you going to find those? Google it. Okay, if you Google Common Core, it'll take you to the Common Core website. It's going to ask you what subject area. You're going to pick math. It's going to ask what grade level. You're going to pick 4th grade. It's going to ask what kind of subject area you're going to teach. Let's say we're going to teach about multiplication. You pick multiplication, and it's going to list the standards, the multiplication standards that students should be able to know and do. So those standards can kind of really help you write these learning outcomes, because most standards are kind of written like a learning outcome. They don't have to be the same. But what you want to identify is, so if we're teaching multiplication, what might an outcome be like? Students may, let's see, so students, 4th grade math students will be able to multiply using 7s. Right? I'm not a math teacher. You can tell. Okay? Multiply using 7s. Okay? Is there going to be a math standard that fits that? Yes, there's going to be a math standard that says students will know their multiplication tables or something like that. So that would be what you would reference in terms of your outcome and you're going to list that standard. So in this case, you will list Common Core 3.4.1, and there'll be a number there that you use. Okay? So preferably, not has to be, but preferably every one of your outcomes are aligned to some kind of standard. And the idea would be that after you have a whole year's worth of lesson plans, and if you looked and you did alignment on all of your standards, what would you be able to see? The what?
They would know all the Common Core standards.
okay, that you would have taught to every standard on there. You would have a list here. You could make a matrix. We call it a curriculum map of some sort that you could see that this lesson I taught this standard. This lesson I taught this standard. And you'd be able to have check marks all the way through to know that, hey, I taught every standard in the Common Core 4th grade math. Right? Now, on my example, I have the ISTE standards. What are the ISTE standards? We did learn about this before.
A little circle thing with
No. Good. International Society for Technology and Education. Those are the technology standards. Okay, instructional technology standards. So, or the technology education standards. Now, as you are teaching math, might you also meet some technology standards? Yes. So, as for me, because it's a technology class, right? You're teaching a technology lesson, or you're teaching a lesson using technology, I would like to see also at least one of your outcomes aligned to an ISTE standard. So you're going to have two sets of standards that you're working with. You're going to have your content standards, and then you also have the technology standards. And I want to see which one of your outcomes meet the technology standard. So as part of this lesson, and this is, again, this isn't a technology lesson. This is a lesson that you are putting together using technology. You're going to have students in some way or another use technology. Yes? And when you do that, you will meet one of these standards. You're going to go back to the ISTE standards, and you're going to have to look at those. Again, remember, ISTE standards for students. There are like 5 different sets of ISTE standards. You want the ISTE standards for students, because that's who you're going to be working with. So, are outcomes a big deal? Is it going to take you some work? Trust me, you'll get better at it, okay? It's going to take you some time, but as you work, through your career, it'll be to where you can just come up with, you can write outcomes pretty easily. But you're just learning right now, I understand, but it's going to take some time. Okay. All right. Next section is assessments. Okay? Assessments. Now, I'm going to take a quick minute here and teach you a quick thing on assessments. Okay? There are 2 types. You might want to write these down. There are 2 types of assessments. There are formative and summative. Formative and summative. Anybody heard those terms? Okay, formative, summative. Now, keep in mind, let me reference here. You have 2 sections of standards. You have the informal assessment. You have informal assessment and you have formal assessment. Okay, so those are, I'm going to say, 2 categories. And then 2 types of assessments are formative or summative. Anybody want to take a shot of the difference between the 2? That's all right. Okay, so formative, when you think of formative, I want you to think of building. Okay, I want to think of building. They're building on top of other things. So formative, or another thing you should write down, are ongoing. Okay, another term you should equate that with is ongoing. So formative types of assessments are ways, which, first of all, what's an assessment? How would you describe an assessment?
Like a way to test skills.
Okay, good. A way to measure if students are learning, right? So an assessment is a measurement to see if students are learning. So a formative assessment is one that's going to be kind of ongoing and helping to build on each other to help students to learn. So formative assessments might be where, like daily assignments. Okay, think about a math class where every day we're doing some assignments, right? So the students do an assignment, and I grade it, I give it back to them, and can they learn from that? Yes, and so then we go forward. So formative are more ongoing. They're more building in terms of helping students to use that assessment to help them learn. Summative are more at the end. Okay, summative are at the end. So that's like an end of unit test is a summative. So summative are more so at the end of whatever it is you are doing, your unit, your chapter, whatever it might be, you are assessing your students to see how much they know. But it doesn't really necessarily, it's not really building and allowing students to develop. It's more at the end, what do you know or what you don't know. Does that make sense? Okay, so the easiest example is, daily assignments are going to be formative. They're going to be building and helping students learn. Whereas the summative is going to be at the end of the unit, I'm going to test you. Okay, your ACT test, that's a very summative test. That's a measurement on, what you know at that point in time. But you don't really use the ACT to learn necessarily. You use it basically, it's used to test you. So those are the difference. Then we also have informal and formal. So informal assessments are those that we typically do not collect grades on. In a simple term, informal assessments are those that we don't collect grades. These are more they're informal, they're a natural part of class. So examples that you see here, we have questioning, observation, maybe a pop quiz. They're kind of just ways for you as a teacher to tell, if your students are getting it or not. So maybe you ask a question. All right, can you kind of help, can you see if students learn or not by doing that? Yeah, so maybe we've had some Socrative quizzes, right? Have you take a Socrative quiz? Okay, that helps me to see if you're kind of learning it. Maybe I don't give you points for it. It's just an in-class activity that we do. So what are some ways that you're going to do that throughout your lesson? So those can be formative or summative. Really, summative is probably going to be more of a formal, though. All right, next section, resources. Okay, what are the resources you use to develop this lesson? Where did you get your information? Where are you getting your information? Okay, Common Core standards.
The textbook.
Textbook, perfect. Right? Where else? The internet. Okay, are you going to Google some? You got to teach about the Constitution? Are you going to Google Constitution? Okay, more than likely you are. All right, so where are you getting your information from? That provides a little bit of validation, as well as it helps you to know where you got that. It kind of helps you develop your references and know where you got the information. Next section, materials needed. What are you going to need to teach this class? To teach these for 45 minutes. Are you going to need scissors for all students? Are you going to need crayons? Are you going to need iPads for all students? So these are the resources that you're going to need, the materials that you need in order to teach this. Next section, activity or lesson. This is probably, I would say, one of the top two most important parts of the lesson plan. Okay, your outcomes and your activity are the two main areas that you're going to need to spend the most time on. And this is where you go through and provide a detailed list, step by step, of what you need to do to teach this lesson. This is your outline, if you will, that you can follow. Okay, so as you can see on my example here, this is where you kind of identify what you're going to do and, more importantly, when or how long it's going to take. So as part of this, you need to include time estimates. So first 5 minutes of class, this is what we're going to do. The next 20 minutes, this is what we're going to do. The next 5 minutes, this is what we're going to do. So you break it down and you plan out your whole class period. This gives you something to follow. Okay, especially if it's the first time that you've taught this, it's easy to get into it and to kind of forget where you are, where you're going. This helps you to go back and say, okay, this is what I need to do. Or, if you kind of plan 5 minutes and all of a sudden you're going on 20 minutes, you better move along. Okay, so this helps you plan your lesson. Last, we have the formal assessment. Again, these can be either formative or summative. And this is where you do collect information, you do collect grades to provide some type of assessment on how your students are doing. And the last section is a reflection, which actually you won't fill this out until after you've taught the lesson. Meaning, once you've done it, now you come back at the end of the day. Okay, at the end of the day, it's 3 o'clock. You actually have a second to sit down and take a breath. Go back to your lesson plan and take a few minutes and fill out your reflection on what worked, what didn't work. One of the important parts of this reflection section is look at the outcomes, meaning go back to the outcomes and say, okay, this is what I said students are going to be able to know and do. Did they actually do that? Were students actually able to do that? Or did I kind of miss something and I need to pick up on it later? So, what are the some values in having a good lesson plan? Is it going to take time for you to put together a good lesson plan? Yes. I can see it on your faces that you're really excited about having to put one of these together. Okay, it does take time. So what's the return on the investment?
You taught your students a lesson.
You taught your students a lesson. Hopefully, if you've done a good job putting together your lesson plan, that you've at least done everything you can to prepare a good, worthwhile lesson, right? So there's value in that, yes? Okay, what else?
Helps your class runs.
Good. Helps your class run smoother. You've got a plan. You go through it. Again, that comes back to that activity or lesson. You can go through these. Okay, again, you're not winging it. You got a plan, and you're following your plan, which should help things go smoother.
You can reuse it in the future.
Absolutely. That's a huge value. Is that next year, are you going to teach this lesson again?
Yes.
And do you want to start over from scratch next year?
Nope.
No. So you pull out your lesson plan, and all of that information is there ready to go. You will thank yourself over and over again next year when you have to teach this that you went through and took the time to put this together. Is it a lot of work on the forefront? Absolutely. For you as a new teacher, you're going to have a lot of this, and you're going to be spending a lot of time doing this. I guarantee you could put all of this together, and if you don't write it down, are you going to remember all that next year? You're not. And next year, you're going to be thinking, man, I remember I had this all put together. It was perfect. I didn't write any of it down. I don't remember any of those things. And then what do you do? Now you're trying to put it together again. So taking this time really helps you out next year. Come back to that resources section. Let's say you found a perfect website to teach this concept, and you use that website in your class. Are you going to remember that next year? Of where exactly you found it? Now hopefully you bookmark it, but let's say you didn't. All right, this allows you to go back. Right there's the link for you. Pull it up, and you can use it. It will save you time and time and time and time going forward. So that's why there are all these components in the lesson plan. Yes, it takes time and effort to put it together, but there are tremendous values in having a good, solid lesson plan. Questions? Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so, we make this huge lesson plan, and then how do we squeeze it into 5 minutes?
All right, good question. So in terms of this assignment that you're going to do for me, what you are teaching us in class here is just going to be a small segment of the whole activity or lesson. So again, in that activity lesson section, this is where you're going to plan out your 45 minutes. You're just going to give us a piece of it. And what I'm going to say is, I want the piece where you are actually teaching concepts. And that's what you're going to give to us. So think about what you want to teach, all right? Then what's kind of the meat of that, and that's what I want you to actually teach to us. Okay, so for example, you might have an activity where you're going to have students go to a website for 10 minutes and do these little activities on a website. You with me there? Okay, is that what I want you to teach to us? No, that does not show me that you know how to teach. That shows me that you can direct students to a website. So what I want you to give to us is actually you teaching us something. All right, now, what you teach, in this case, for example, lecture PDF, that took 20 minutes. So if I was doing this assignment in this context, then I might take 5 minutes and do one of those things. So I'm going to demonstrate and teach you this piece for this recording. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. Again, 5 minutes isn't a long time, but it's long enough where you can teach some good stuff. Okay. You're going to be surprised when you're standing up here trying to teach students how long 30 seconds is. And you're going to run through this, and you're going to take about 1 minute and run through your 3 or 4 PowerPoint slides, and you're going to be done. And you're like, man, that went fast, because you're nervous, and you're going to run through things, and you're not going to stop. And so you can teach a lot in 4 or 5 minutes. But then as part of this also, I want to see, one of the expectations for this is that you are going to use technology. So I don't just want a PowerPoint. Yes, it is technology. But what I want to see is that you're using some different types, and specifically interactive technology. You just went through Module 10. That talks about interactive technology. And we're going to talk about this next class period. I'm going to give a little more thorough demonstration on using the interactive whiteboard, because many of you will have a smartboard in your class. That's a form of technology. We looked at interactive apps, or in Module 10, you looked at Socrative and Kahoot and those types of things. Those are good interactive technologies. So as part of this lesson, even in what you do, I want you to incorporate those things. Okay? Now, if you make a Socrative I'm going to say maximum of like 5 questions. Because again, we don't have a long time. But you can have a minute or two to direct students to go to the website, go to the Socrative site. They're going to log into your account, and they'll take your quiz, right? So you don't have to use one of those, but those are likely something I'm looking for, is to see that you're using more than just a PowerPoint. So if you're going to use the interactive whiteboard, that you've put this together, and students come up and they draw on the whiteboard, they do something that's an in-class as you're teaching things, that's something that you can use.
I have a question, kind of just about the informal assessment. But so if you didn't collect like actual grades for it, but like you did participation points, would that not have the same effect, or like?
It's participation points. I mean, you could list that as an informal assessment.
Okay.
I guess you could argue it's also formal because you're giving points for it, but I think it could go either way.
Okay.
So yeah, that's good.
Okay, so you actually want us to like put together like PowerPoints and stuff for your lesson plan? Like will we turn in a PowerPoint or whatever? For the lesson plan?
You don't have to, other than what you're going to teach to us.
Okay.
Okay. So for example, you're going to have a formal. You need to identify your formal assessment. You don't have to actually create the formal assessment. Okay. So a formal assessment might be their assignment that they take home with them. You don't have to create that for me. Okay. It might be good for you to go ahead and do it and put it together. And if you want to, great. The formal assessment at the end of this might be the Chapter 3 test. Okay, you don't have to make the Chapter 3 test, but you're going to identify what is the way that you're going to assess to measure if students have learned the outcomes as you identified. Okay, so this should be complete. Your lesson plan should be complete for the 45 minutes. You are just going to be giving us a small piece of it. But let me re-emphasize. Okay, the part that you teach to us should be you teaching, meaning. Do I want a 4-minute video as part of your teaching? You'd be amazed at the number of times I've gotten lessons where we sit and we watch 4 minutes of a video. Now, is it wrong to use a 4-minute video? No, that could well be a part of your 45 minutes. Is that the part that I want you to give me? No. This is your opportunity to demonstrate to me that you can teach. And so I want you to pick some concepts and I want you to teach to us. Again, it's context. And when you start your teaching lesson, you're going to say, okay, students, this is my 3rd grade math class. And now we're all setting our brains to we're 3rd graders, okay? So I know it's going to be a little awkward when you're, let's say if you're in early childhood and you're teaching about colors, to teach college students about colors, but that's just what you're going to have to do. Okay, so imagine that we are your students at that grade level, and you're going to teach to that. Okay?
So as in teaching art, would you rather me get up here and give a lecture about like art history? And then kind of go in and like hand out a worksheet of like type of art that I would have them do after learning what kind of,
I mean, that's okay. I mean, you ask a good question.
I don't think I'd have enough time to teach them actually how to create the art.
Right, but let's say you're teaching about the use of lines, and so you can go either way. All right. So I have areas like PE, for example. Okay. So what is PE going to teach? You're not allowed to take us to the gym, all right? No. But there are in-class concepts that you are going to teach in PE, right? Might be a little more health related, okay? But there are concepts that you're going to teach in PE, and that's what I want you to do, okay? My shop students, no, we are not going to go down to the wood shop and run the table saw, okay? Though as much as I'd enjoy doing that, so you got to come up with something that you could do in a classroom setting that you can teach today. So again, think about some concepts that you need to teach, part of what you're doing, and teach those.
Okay.
But it could be art history. But if you want to teach about how to draw, I think you could still do that in a classroom environment. Yeah.
When do we do the teaching?
We will be doing these teachings next week. All right. So you need to prepare. On Thursday, we will go through and. I'm going to show you a few more things. We're going to talk a little bit more about delivering a lesson. I'm going to show you some more things on using interactive whiteboard and some of those different interactive apps. Then starting next Tuesday, we will be doing these lessons. You will teach them to us. One of the reasons I only give you 5 minutes is because we got to get through everybody. We will probably take us 3 class periods to get through everybody. All right, so on Thursday, we'll have a sign up on who's going to be going over the next 3 class periods. For your enjoyment, I'm going to be recording these, video recording your lesson. And what you will do is after you're done, I'm going to post these on YouTube for the world to see because you guys are amazing. I will put them as unlisted, and you will be the only person that gets the link to get to the video. But after you do that, after you teach it, you'll get an email from me with a link to the YouTube video. You're going to go watch yourself teach it, and then you're going to come back and you're going to fill out that reflection part. After you've experienced the teaching, after you watch yourself do it, now I want you to come back and say, what did you do? How did you do? If you were to do it again, what would you do differently? Okay, so I want a good paragraph here on your reflection over you doing it. And then what you will do, as a heads up, on the day that you have to teach this, you're going to give me a print copy of your lesson plan. Okay, how many copies should you bring to class? 2. Why 2?
One for you, one for your.
Okay, I want one because I'm going to be writing on it as you're teaching. And then you're going to want one while you're up here, yes?
Yes.
So you're going to bring 2 print copies. Then, after you've taught it, then you're going to come back to your original lesson plan. You're going to complete this reflection. You're going to save it as a PDF, and you're going to submit it. All right, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about how you're going to submit these things on Thursday, but that'll be kind of the process. But you need to begin preparing yourself for possibly next Tuesday. I need 6 or 7 of you to teach next Tuesday. So you're going to need to be working on that this week. There'll be no other assignments this week. On the LIT site, that lists the assignment for my online students. So you don't have to worry about any of that necessarily. We're doing all this in class. So there's no reflection, there's any of those things. We're going to be teaching these things. All right?
Is anything due Sunday night then?
So then nothing will be due Sunday night this week. Okay? All right. Any other questions? That is all the time I have. All right, we'll see you. Let's put the chairs back, and we'll see you on Thursday.